Day 20, ridiculed. So, God has a tendency to ask us to do things that are, in fact, ridiculous. It happens up and down the scriptures. Choosing Abraham and Sarah in their old age to start a family that would end up being as numerous as the stars is absurd. Allowing Joseph to be sold into slavery in order to have him rule Egypt and save people from famine, absurd. Picking David above his brothers to be king of Israel, foolish. Jesus being born of a virgin in a barn in the middle of nowhere as the local king went on a killing spree to get him, unbelievable. One of the reasons why it is really hard to follow God and be his disciple is because he operates above the realm of human reason, and he enters into he lives on a plane that to us often seems entirely absurd as it's happening. I mean, when I look at my own life, so much of the resistance I have to doing what God has wanted me to do comes down to how ridiculous it seems and how afraid I was of having to share with other people some ridiculous notion or some ridiculous new thing I was going to go do, where the only rationale behind it was, I think this is what God is calling me to do and I got to follow him. I remember in the summer of 2010, I was going to Mass by myself, despite not being Catholic. And I was going every Sunday. I wasn't missing. And no one in my life understood why I was going to Mass every Sunday, including me. Well, one day, someone in my family finally asked the question, what are you doing? Why in the world would you ever go to church? And she kind of said it with a biting tone when she did it. Well, without thinking, I just responded. I just said, it's because it's where I hear God. And sometimes if I'm quiet enough, I can actually still hear the echoes of the cackle of laughter that followed to that response. And then the tone of, oh, so you can hear God now? So tell me, what does this voice sound like in that mocking, ridicule, condescending tone that makes me want to shrink into a corner, even just thinking about it, you know? How could you ever think something so absurd? What does his voice sound like? An answer I obviously couldn't give. So I didn't say anything in response, you know, like I didn't have an answer. I mean, how do you even respond with how someone's voice sounds? It's a really difficult thing to describe anyway. So I just took the ridicule right on the chin. But I also learned from the people around me in that moment that faith was something I had to keep hidden unless I was going to be okay with being ridiculed for it, unless I was going to be okay with being mocked and on the receiving end of some seriously condescending tones. The influence of that ridicule in that moment cannot be understated. Eventually, I even delayed becoming Catholic because I was afraid of that ridicule, because I was afraid of the fact that the real and truest and deepest answer is, I'm becoming Catholic because I had a personal encounter with the Lord Jesus, and he is asking me to be Catholic. How do you explain that? How do you explain that to an actual Catholic, let alone a non-Catholic, who finds the idea of someone entering into this slowly, seemingly dying church that everybody is leaving? How could you explain to them that you're going into it? So I delayed. And you know what? My fear around becoming Catholic, it wasn't unfounded either. You know, when I actually did say, hey, I'm becoming Catholic, I pretty much received exactly what I was expecting. And in some case, worse than I was expecting. Other cases better, but in a lot of cases, worse. And I know I'm not alone in that. A few years ago, friends of mine were struggling to have kids, and it wasn't looking good. At the same time, they were considering buying a house that only made sense if they were going to have a family. They wanted to buy the house because they felt confident that even though it really seemed like they weren't going to be able to have any kids, they felt confident that beyond all reason, God was still going to bless them and that they were going to fill that house with children. But they almost didn't buy it because they were afraid of the ridicule they would receive from people close to them. But when they asked me what I think they should do, I responded with the only advice people pretty much only ever need in life, which is, what do you think God is asking you to do? Whatever that is, do that. They bought the house. They even overpaid for it. They were scolded. They were ridiculed. They continued to be infertile for a few years. And now, well, the house is full of kids. Peter walking on water was ridiculous. And it would have been reasonable to laugh at him for even considering the possibility of stepping out of the boat and entering into the world of the absurd. But he did. He risked ridicule to pursue Jesus. And as my friend and mentor, Dr. Gregory Bitar, likes to say, the only way in life you don't end up with Jesus is if you stay in the boat, afraid of being ridiculed. So today, ask yourself, are you in the boat? Or are you out of the boat? From the fear of ridicule, deliver me, Jesus.